The Worst of All Time, Part 2, in which we introduce Nick Ruskin as the voice of the Friar. We're like anti-vampires, careful to leave the city before dark, and looking for an out-of-the-way place where we can beam back home without attracting attention. We are hardly out the door when we literally bump into two very well-lubricated citizens, each holding a bottle in their hand. I beg your pardon, sir.
Don't you speak funny, mister?
Pretty high in the instep, if you ask me, Bert.
Yeah, look at the Klaus. You should have a word with your tailor.
They should put you on stage, sir.
Each man finds the other completely hilarious.
Or in the circus, Charlie.
Along with his two lady friends.
No, Charlie, the stage for this one.
A man called Bert is pointing at me, and the stench of cheap gin just about makes me gag.
Put him alongside Romeo Coates, and wouldn't that be a sight?
I do my best not to breathe. In a fit of hysterical laughter, the two men struggle to hold each other up. You know Robert Coates?
We should leave now, Fred.
No, Robert Coates. Where have you been, man? Everyone knows him, don't they, Bert?
Bloody worst actor in England.
Bloody worst. Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? and remember how Romeo split his breeches. What? Aye, and the buffoon's costume's so tight, he walks around like a living corpse, don't he, Bert?
He does, Charlie.
and then he's on the buggering balcony bending down to Juliet. And then, rip. And every time after that, every time he turns his back to the audience,
rip.
And don't the audience throw over every time, Bert?
No, they do, Charlie. And that beef-wit Coates thinks they're cheering his performance.
Or maybe the size of his bollocks.
Janet keeps hugging me on the elbow, but this material is gold. Can't leave yet. Charlie and Bert continue to stagger and sway. Some of the drink meets their lips, but a good deal dribbles down their chins.
And then comes the death scene, Charlie.
Mustn't forget the death scene.
Die again, Romeo, the audience calls out.
Die again.
And don't he just do that, Charlie?
The great tulip does, Bert, he does, right after pulling poor Juliet across the stage like a sack of potatoes.
Poor love.
Nice piece of muslin, though.
This reenactment seems to have taken the wind out of Bert and Charlie. They catch their breath, take fresh swigs, then finally resume their zigzagging journey down the street. Linda is grinning, but not Janet. What?
I told you we should leave.
Yes, but then we would have missed. Linda comes to my rescue at just the right time. She points to her bag.
Got it.
You've got it? Really? I can see a lens poking out the top of her bag.
We don't pay you nearly enough, Linda.
Can we just go now?
Absolutely. Everyone ready? Let's link arms.
Damn.
What's the matter?
The date function, it's like it's...
Oh, cripes, I think.
No. It's okay now. Everything's fine.
You're sure?
3 to beam up.
Back in Toronto, Linda is busy picking olives off her pizza.
Too bad we have to keep hopping back and forth between here and England.
But you understand why we have to, Linda.
I'm not an idiot, Janet.
You did let the battery get down to 30%.
30% is fine. Still a couple of hours left.
Yeah, well, if it came down to us looking for a place to plug in our rechargers...
Hey, don't touch my olives.
I think we'd be seriously out of luck.
I said don't touch my olives. What about your scientist guy?
Davy? He might be able to send a current through you and make your hair stand on end, but that's about it.
Even if we plied him with panties?
I pop open a second beer. I wonder if I should head for the Chardonnay as well. I think it may be time to visit Mr. Coates again.
Agreed. Get his version of how opening night went.
We could, Janet, but I was thinking about going back to meet the older Mr. Coates, back in London. When was it again? 1825?
Wouldn't it make sense to do things chronologically? Get his impressions while they're fresh?
When have we ever done things chronologically? Besides, I don't want to depend too much on Linda's camera. What if it quits on us unexpectedly?
Thanks for the confidence, boss.
You know what I mean. The fewer trips we make, the better, right? For safety's sake. After all, things break, don't they?
Oh my God, Fred, when did you get to be so girly?
And besides, the elder Mr. Coates already knows us. He's comfortable with us, right on the verge of really opening up. And Lord knows it's not like we can just wander around town willy-nilly doing man-on-the-street interviews. Besides, what do we do for money? ID. Even our accents are a problem. No, I think we're safest in RC's drawing room.
Boring.
I'm not saying we can't ever go elsewhere or else when, but for now, maybe we could be a little conservative.
Super boring.
We already know all we need to know about RC's time in Bath, right? And then there was that performance in Brighton. Have I got that right?
Followed by Cheltenham and then London.
Well, then, isn't it time to ask Mr. Coates about his London debut?
Pretty much what I've been saying, Fred. We should go back to 1811.
We could, but I'm actually more interested in RC's memory of the event, what he remembers after many years of dwelling on it, through the filter of mature eyes.
Well, I guess you old guys need to stick together, don't you?
Janet and Linda think this is a hilarious joke, but honestly, how juvenile can you get? I finish my beer.
Okay, Fred, you're the director.
Thank you.
But let's not forget Baron Ferdinand Gérame. Honestly, he's the most colorful character in this whole story. And from all accounts, he's supposed to be incredibly sexy.
Really?
Clark Gable swashbuckling lookalike.
Suddenly the room was filled with estrogen, and me with no air filter.
I'll make sure the battery's fully charged.
So, do we have a deal? You give me your word we'll have a chance to interview the Baron.
Robert Coates first, then the Baron. How does that sound? It's mid-afternoon, and a promising early spring day, when Robert Coates greets us at the door.
Ah, Mr. Pruitt. Ladies, please, come in.
My waist and tailcoat seem to demand of me a small bow, so that's what I do. Though I think mine is probably more of a stage bow and not quite appropriate. There's even a Regency word for it. I've just made a magnificent leg, I believe. Would now be a good time?
It would, sir. Please, please, set up your peculiar paraphernalia as you see fit. I leave the technical details entirely in your hands.
I'm assured by my friend in Stratford that my costume is completely authentic for the era, right down to that ridiculous cravat which makes my neck itchy. But it pales in comparison to what Mr. Coates is wearing. I have to speak to Janet to find the appropriate vocabulary, after which I may say that Mr. Coates sports a blue surtout coat arranged with frogged braid and a high shirt collar encircled by a bright yellow bandana. His legs, without diamond-studded knee buckles this time, are encased in well-polished Hessian boots whose tops are adorned with large tassels, and so forth. It's exhausting to describe, and maybe it's a waste of time on radio. Robert Coates moves to his chair. Once there, he dusts off seat and arms with a handkerchief, keeping it at the ready, I don't know, in case there's a sudden dust storm. Finally, he sets his snuff-box on a nearby table.
Please, please, be seated, ladies. You too, Mr. Pruitt. Be at your ease. Since we last met, Mr. Pruitt, I have given careful thought to which incidents from my past, if I may say so, my colorful past, might be of interest to readers.
I'm sure you have a great deal to choose from, Mr. Coates.
I have also given a good deal of thought to the book's dedication.
Ah, the book. Damn it. I had hoped he'd forgotten.
Just so, my memoir. As we agreed, I am unsure of the case in America, but here in England it is always necessary to dedicate one's book to a patron, nor would a salute to the muses be amiss.
What did you have in mind, sir?
The dedication might read thus. Most illustrious Baron Ferdinand Gérame, As you are a distinguished patron of the theatre, a leader in fashion, a defender of justice and fair play, nor any stranger yourself to the service of the muses, I beg permission to dedicate this memoir of my theatrical exploits to your protection. And I feel emboldened to say that this memoir will be as accurate and fair account of the state of our English theatre as has ever found its way to print or documentary during these last 2 decades.
Then, with a flourish of his hand, R.C. reads out the end of the dedication.
I have the honor to be, sir, your most obliged servant and good friend, Mr. Robert Coates, the 2nd of April, 1825.
Got all that, Linda?
You betcha.
And that, of course, will appear at the front of the book, yes?
In the credits, for sure. No problem, Mr. Coates.
Credits?
As a film director, I am more than familiar with the convenient lie. At the front of the book, sir, just as you say.
Most excellent.
Mr. Coates pauses to take some snuff. His snuff-box was no mere bauble. It's a piece of enamel art, truly, even to the eye of someone who does not touch tobacco in any way. Linda, can you get a close-up?
Ah, Mr. Pruitt, you have a discerning eye. From the collection of Viscount Petersham. There are no finer snuff-boxes in the kingdom. Are you sure you will not partake?
I thank you, sir, but no.
As you wish. How shall we proceed, then? What year or performance would you like me to reflect upon?
Start with Mr. Coates's curricle.
Mr. Coates, may we go back to the year 1811, where by then you had moved to London?
You may indeed, sir. It was a very fine year.
Thankfully, Janet has supplied me with copious notes, and for the most part I can read her handwriting. As I understand it, Mr. Coates, not only were you well known upon the stage, especially in Bath, but you had by this time achieved an even wider fame as, what would the word be?
Oh, it would not be unfair to say, Mr. Pruitt, that I had achieved some notoriety as a beau.
Not in the sense you're thinking, Fred. More a man about town, a dandy.
You were known for your sense of fashion.
It's so kind of you to say so.
I flip over the page. Here's the part about the curricle, which included a particularly extravagant horse-drawn carriage.
My curricle, you mean? Indeed, sir. It was most extravagant.
I stop for a moment, surprised. The word extravagant seems to have no negative connotation for Mr. Coates whatsoever. Is it true some refer to you as Curricle Coates at this time?
Not a sobriquet I was particularly fond of, but chacun a son goût, I suppose. The press will have its way.
They also called him Romeo Coates and sometimes Diamond Coates.
Would you mind describing your curricle for us?
Alas, Mr. Pruitt, my precious curricle is no longer with us, but over the years many illustrations of it have found their way into various London publications. None of them are quite accurate, but I have kept one which is reasonable facsimile. May I show it to you?
Please, Mr. Coates. R.C. walks over to a small Japanese-style bamboo rack, which contains, among other things, a copy of the London Illustrated Times. He turns to the appropriate page, and Linda zooms in. Oh, my. Drawn by 2 white horses.
Beautiful animals, are they not?
Personally, I have no special affinity for horses, but I have to admit this pair seems to have been lifted from some fairy tale. The spokes of the carriage wheels are a rainbow of colors. The general effect is of a vehicle meant more for display than serious travel. The sides of it are a deep crimson in color, and the inside is richly lined and upholstered. I doubt King Charles rides in better style. And the carriage's backing, Mr. Coates, how would you describe?
Shaped like a cockle shell, sir. Can you not see it?
Oh, I do, Mr. Coates, now that you point it out. Excellently fashioned.
I'm so glad you think so, Mr. Pruitt. And the back, regrettably not visible in the illustration, is painted a beautiful lake blue, a color of which I'm especially fond.
And what is that I see on top? Linda, can you zoom in? A coat of arms?
My personal emblem, sir.
The emblem depicts a rooster with outstretched wings, vaguely reminiscent of some lesser Egyptian deity. Above it rests a motto.
What do you think of my cock, Mr. Pruitt?
I'm sorry, your what?
My capon, my chick, my cockerel.
Oh, I see. Yes, it's quite fetching. There's a big grin on Linda's face. I'm half expecting her to tell me fetching is as good a word as any to describe someone's cock. It's a little hard to read the motto, Mr. Coates.
While I live, I'll crow. Somewhat clever, wouldn't you say?
Ah, yes, I see what you mean.
And, of course, much of the curricle's architecture makes reference to the motto. The carriage sports several cocks, the gold-plated one, of course, and several of brass. I gave the design considerable thought, Mr. Pruitt.
And you used your curricle for basic transportation?
I went everywhere in it, sir. The Row, Pall Mall, Bond Street, Hyde Park. Sometimes, of course, business compelled me to park it outside the Bank of England. Many times I was fortunate to have a lady of substance as my passenger, and on occasion Baron Ferdinand Gérôme.
Then if I may be so bold, Mr. Coates, it was your intention to be seen.
When one appears in public, this is one's purpose, surely, even one's duty.
Think pimp and pink Cadillac. Well, not exactly, but you get the drift.
I do miss my curricle. I wish you and the ladies might have seen it in person.
It's at this point that Mrs. Coates enters the room. It's the first time we've met. We share tea and exchange pleasantries.
The tea is delicious, Mrs. Coates. Thank you so much.
Emma Coates is a modest woman and quiet, in stark contrast to her husband. She busies herself with needlepoint as we continue to film. We have one more line of questioning scheduled, but frankly, I'm a little squeamish about it, especially in the presence of Mrs. Coates. I spend too long reviewing my notes, so Janet grows impatient and jumps in. She hands me the boom and mic.
Hold this.
But I'm the...
Just hold it. Mr. Coates, do you mind if I ask you a few questions?
By all means, Miss Singleton.
I see a marvelous transformation in Mr. Coates. His face lights up. He sits up straighter and brushes back his hair. He is fully dandified.
Your move to London in 1811 was, by all accounts, a great success.
Many would say so.
I understand the crowds would line the streets just to catch sight of your curricle, especially the ladies.
You cannot blame them, Miss Singleton.
I want to yell out, all the while crying out cock-a-doodle-doo. It's right there in Janet's notes.
And you were how old at the time? Early 40s?
39, Miss Singleton.
In your prime, then, an extremely eligible bachelor. And surely, Mr. Coates, you must have had many, many admirers, and still do, no doubt.
I notice Emma Coates looking up from her needlepoint. I think she's about to say something, but for some reason, she seems to change her mind.
Likewise, it seems highly likely there were some ladies among the London crowd that you took a particular fancy to?
Indeed, Miss Singleton. What young gentleman would not have his Beatrice, his Juliet, if you like?
Who was yours, Mr. Coates?
Miss Catherine Tilney Long, of course.
A woman of some wealth, as I recall.
If one were to call £60,000 per annum some wealth, yes, indeed, but that is hardly the point. More than for her fortune, Miss Tilney Long was prized for her beauty and culture. She was a very gifted woman. I was only one of many who sought her favor.
How interesting.
The list of admirers was long, Miss Singleton, but most notable among them was William IV himself, the Duke of Clarence back then, and also Sir Lumley Skeffington, and of course my dear friend Baron Ferdinand. Truly, I was the least of her suitors, a worshipper more than a suitor, for how could I compete with the likes of a Prince Regent, or the famous Baron, for that matter?
Janet looks in her notebook. On the very page I was about to refer to when she so rudely usurped me.
I have here a poem which you allegedly wrote to Miss Tilney Long.
How extraordinary that it still exists.
May I read it?
I should be pleased to hear it again.
Janet's in her element. She could have been a prosecuting attorney. She seems especially interested in Emma Coates' reaction, as is Linda, who swivels her camera to her left. Emma's reaction is subtle, however, a slight roll of the eyes and almost inaudible sigh.
On second thought, Mr. Coates, may I impose upon you to read the poem, considering your oratorical gifts?
Janet hands over her notebook.
Miss Singleton, you must truly speak to your bookbinder, for never have I held in my hands a sheet of paper so flimsy. My dear Miss Singleton, it will not last.
He clears his throat, strikes a pose, and holds the spiral notebook in front of him at arm's length.
Titian, could he but view thy heavenly face, in vivid colours he'd each beauty trace. Lucretia's charms were great, but thine surpassed nature's first model or that Grecian lass. Enchanting fair one, save, oh, quickly save your dying lover from an early grave. Lady, oh, too bewitching lady, now beware of artful men who'd fain would thee ensnare. Nor for thy merits, but thy fortune's sake, give me your hand, your cash let Venus take.
Excellent, sir. So well delivered.
I did not write it myself, of course.
Oh?
One hires a professional for such things, obviously. We all did. One mustn't leave such things to chance.
I quite understand.
Of course, it was all for naught. In the end, the lady's hand was given to that scoundrel.
Scoundrel?
The Honourable, not so honourable in truth, William Wellesley Pole, a scoundrel black and mean, Miss Singleton. Within a few short years he had squandered nearly all his wife's inheritance. Gambling, you see.
How tragic.
Indeed it was, Miss Singleton, a truly Shakespearean change in fortune. It was only last year that poor Catherine was forced to sell nearly all her precious belongings. A tragedy and travesty both.
3 years ago, dearest.
3? So long?
May I ask, Mr. Coates, what you were thinking just now?
The sheer devastation, Miss Singleton. The carved ebony chairs, the Gobelin tapestries, velvet wall hangings from Genoa. 3.5 guineas per yard, I'm told. Carpets embroidered in silk with the family coat of arms. Catherine had to part with all these and so much more. And then, even then, Miss Singleton, it was not enough. To escape the remainder of the debtors, she had to move to France, like some common criminal. Oh, c'est très, très dommage.
Here Mr. Coates pauses to dab his eye with a hanky. A second hanky, not the one he uses for dusting.
Forgive the diversion, Miss Singleton. You were asking about 1811, I believe. As I've said, it was a very good year. We were all so much younger then. My days upon the boards, they were very fine. And the curricle, of course, and London itself, so vibrant, so full of life. A true beau monde. Men of fashion around every corner, and me and the Baron trying to outdo one another. It was glorious.
Amusing as well, Mr. Coates?
Oh, indeed. I remember particularly my visits to see the Viscount, the same man who gifted me these extraordinary snuff-boxes, not to mention the fine tea mixture you were enjoying, known far and wide as the Petersham mixture. You will not find better tea anywhere.
Janet has no problem being a complete suck-up when it suits her, and it was definitely suiting her now.
The tea is excellent.
I watch as Janet takes a sip. Only her second or third. She doesn't really like tea, never drinks it at home.
What else do you remember about the Viscount?
Well, as I said...
Once more Mr. Coates's eyes grow glassy. Mrs. Coates looks up at him and shakes her head. I'm guessing she's heard these stories before.
Did you know, Miss Singleton, that the Viscount, well, now the Earl of Harrington, of course, has his own notable carriage?
Not a curricle?
No, Miss Singleton. Nothing so exquisite, but notable instead for its plainness.
I beg your pardon?
It's entirely painted brown, and his horses, too, both chestnuts, as well as Charles's livery, all his servants dressed in brown from head to toe. Everything in the household, within and without, a mud-like brown. Can you imagine?
Whatever for?
In honor of his paramour, one Mary Brown. A little man, of course, but very chivalrous.
By now, my arm is tired from holding the goddamn boom, but we haven't quite finished. Janet marches over and relieves me, slapping the notebook back into my hands. I look over to Linda, who's nodding. She mouths the words to me, 15%. So I realize there's no time to waste. Very interesting stories, Mr. Coates. We are in your debt. May we avail of just a little more of your time?
Emma and I do have an engagement at Covent Garden this evening, but yes, I can spare a few minutes more.
You're most gracious, sir.
Not at all.
With the late afternoon light now streaming in through the bay windows, I notice for the first time the buttons on R.C.'s waistcoat. They sparkle. They don't call a man Diamond Coates for nothing. Right then, Mr. Coates. Just one more set of questions and we'll call it a day.
Proceed, Mr. Pruitt.
Am I to understand that in this same year, 1811, you left London for a short spell, off to Cheltenham, I believe? R.C. stops to think. He crosses his legs and tilts his head back.
I believe you're correct, Mr. Pruitt. Cheltenham, yes.
Where you reprised your role as Romeo.
I did, sir.
Mr. Coates, it's not the intention of anyone here to bring up unpleasant memories or pay heed to unsubstantiated rumors, but was there not an incident during this performance?
I do not follow, Mr. Pruitt.
I'm having trouble reading Janet's handwriting. Act 2, Scene 5, I think it was?
Your point, Mr. Pruitt?
And Romeo says the line, here it is, "Oh, let us hence, I stand on sudden haste."
And?
Well, as I understand it, you did not leave the stage at this point, even though, again, I have this information only secondhand, even though the stage manager was waving his arms and shouting, "Come off, come off."
To which I replied, Mr. Pruitt, I will come off, damn you, as soon as I find my diamond knee buckle.
I'm sorry?
My diamond-studded knee buckle. It had gone missing.
And so there you were, on your hands and knees, looking for it.
What would you have done, sir?
I double-check my notes. There's not the slightest mention of a knee buckle. Shit, Janet. Oh, I see, Mr. Coates. Yes, I take your point. In a rare gush of early morning enthusiasm, Janet has made all three of us omelets. I'm helping clear away the dishes.
It's stuck.
What's stuck?
The date function.
Linda marches into the kitchen to explain.
The present year's okay, and so is 1825, but the years before that are suddenly all grayed out.
Let me see.
Can we still go back to 1825?
Looks like it.
Janet wipes her hands on her apron, then checks for herself, which annoys the shit out of Linda.
Damn it, you're right. But maybe it's just temporary. The cold weather or something. Sometimes I can't unlock my car when it's cold.
I know nothing about cars, or locks, or time machines, so I continue drying the dishes.
Looks like the location function still works, and the GPS.
We're okay then.
No, Fred. The plan was to visit Baron Ferdinand back in 1811 and get his impressions of R.C.'s debut London performance. But now...
We could still do that, though, right? Only a few years later.
It's not the same, Fred.
Maybe not as fresh, but... Janet's glare is unrelenting.
By 1825, Fred, the Baron's not even in England anymore.
Where the hell is he?
In France.
Doing what?
Being a Trappist monk.
Janet studies her Google Maps carefully, choosing coordinates that should put us right on the shore of an unnamed pond, only a few hundred meters from the monastery of Notre-Dame-du-Mont-des-Olives. Water levels change, of course, and the accuracy of Google Maps is not military grade, so the three of us suddenly find ourselves standing up to our ankles in pond water.
Shit! My good shoes! Oh, so this is Alsace, huh?
50 meters away, on our left, is a fisherman. He tilts his head towards us, but only briefly, then returns to his fishing.
The locals seem accustomed to miracles.
What's a miracle is that we didn't end up impaled in a tree in that forest behind us.
Ye of little faith.
Janet points to a break in the forest where there is a dirt road.
Follow me.
The walk to the monastery is lovely. Darting birds sing from the branches of tall oaks and beech trees. On our left, we pass a tiny bubbling stream. It reminds me of walks Janet and I would sometimes take in High Park, only this forest's a little tamer somehow, more French. So, Janet, tell me again, just why is it we need to see the Baron?
As far as I can tell, he may have been R.C.'s best friend. Besides which, Baron Ferdinand was pretty much a force of nature. Like I said, we could probably do a second doc just on him.
Force of nature how?
Well, he was born in France, hence the surname de Gérame. But the man got around all over Europe. Even served in the Austrian army, where he became close friends with the Empress, after laying out his cloak, Walter Raleigh style, so she shouldn't have to dirty her shoes in a mud puddle. And then he saved a drowning man in the Danube, apparently.
For some reason, Janet pauses here and gives me a look, as if to ask why I had never done such a thing.
Next, he marries some rich Hungarian widow.
Very enterprising.
That's when they begin calling him Baron.
We're off to see the Baron, the wonderful Baron
After
of...
that, Linda, the Baron ends in Sicily, where he becomes close friends with Queen Maria Carolina. Too close, some people say.
What about the Hungarian widow?
Don't know. Anyway, there's a dispute over some woman.
Maria Carolina?
Again, don't know. Anyway, the Baron and his rival agree to meet on the summit of Mount Etna to settle their differences.
You're kidding.
So the story goes.
I like this story.
And apparently, the two combatants have made this pact. Whoever dies, his body is to be cast into the volcanic crater.
Bloody hell.
But in the end, no one dies. However, the Baron's rival is shot in the arm, and that, thankfully, is enough to settle the matter of honor.
And the Baron?
He leaves the mountain with a bullet hole in the top of his hat, but otherwise he's unharmed.
Cripes. So what's next, England?
Honestly, guys, the man never stayed put. He tells the English authorities that he can, on short notice, recruit 24,000 Croatians to serve in the English army with the express purpose of defeating Napoleon Bonaparte.
No way.
Yes, way. And for a while, the English government seems to give his proposition serious consideration. As the government mulls over the proposal, our good friend quickly establishes himself as the beau among beaux in fashionable London.
Ah, the beau factor.
No party is complete without him. It's said that the hussar uniform British soldiers come to wear at this time is inspired entirely by the dress of the Baron, including the pointy whiskers.
Janet pauses to show a picture she has on her phone, the phone I begged her not to bring. But Janet always laughs when I mention the prime directive.
Hello, look at his long locks.
I know. And what about those piercing blue eyes?
Only now he's a monk.
God takes all the good ones, doesn't he?
So, did the Baron ever get those Croatians over to England?
It was a complicated situation. The Baron even tried petitioning King George III directly, but that didn't work out.
The king who was mad.
Exactly. And at times, it was like the Baron was his own worst enemy. In the end, the British government kicked him out of the country.
Look, here we are.
The monastery is impressive, but seems unfinished. Linda, all touristy, gets busy filming it and makes us get into the shot to create perspective.
Come on, you guys, try to smile.
After the French Revolution, they just let the place fall into ruin, and 100 others like it.
Knock down all the reminders of the oppressors, that kind of thing?
kind of. The Trappists had to escape to Switzerland to avoid personal demolition.
But now they're back.
Yes and no. They're actually going to be kicked out again, just 5 years from now.
At first, they won't let us in. It takes a lot of negotiating. And fortunately, my high school French is just good enough to explain that we're good friends of a good friend of Brother Ferdinand, and that we've come to gather a few details about a history we're writing, about a famous English actor. Probably I shouldn't have mentioned the actor part, because although Trappist monks are allowed to talk, their monastic rule requires that they speak only when necessary and never engage in frivolous talk. Laughter, particularly, is much frowned upon. 2 monks in hooded, long white cowls open the monastery's large double doors a second time. I turn to Janet and Linda. Whatever you do, don't be frivolous.
As if.
Janet's answer isn't in the least reassuring. I am surprised when Brother Marcel leads us into a large dining room. We're just in time for the midday meal. Bread and a vegetable soup. Plain fare, but quite filling.
Désirez-vous de la bière?
Beer? Really?
Oui, oui, s'il vous plaît.
Both the bread and soup are delicious, but the beer! Forget the Molsons and Coors of the world and every other generic beer of our century. The Trappists know how to make real beer. Brother Marcel hesitates at first. It could well be he's had little interaction with women for quite some time. But in the end, he fills Janet's and Linda's goblets as well, and finally Janet stops kicking my leg. As the meal ends, another brother approaches us. I noticed him earlier, sitting at the far end of the table. I suppose we're a curious sight to all the residents here. But this brother stares at us with more than the usual intensity. Though somewhat overweight, his stride suggests an athlete. He bows. He's in his 50s. It can be none other than the Baron himself. He still has his locks, but now he's bearded and wears spectacles. Not the heartthrob he once was, but, like the older Sean Connery, still a face to remember.
You are friends of Robert Coates?
His English is perfect. He removes his glasses and holds them in his hands.
I am Friar Marie-Joseph.
Also known as Baron Ferdinand de Gérame.
No longer a baron, ma chère mademoiselle.
I never took Janet for the swooning type. The words chère mademoiselle seem almost to send shivers down Janet's spine.
We've just been to visit Mr. Coates.
He is well?
I take a moment to study the friar's face, but turn away quickly, uncomfortable with his Rasputin eyes.
He's well, yes.
I understand the two of you were good friends at one time.
It was a very long time ago, in another life.
Do you keep in touch at all?
Keep in touch? Forgive me, I do not understand.
Fred means, do you write to one another? Visit?
No, mademoiselle, not for a very long time.
The other monks all rise from the table. It is rest time, and they head for their chambers.
But please, we can walk in the garden. If I can, I will help you with your history.
Unlike Mr. Coates and his cedar friends, Friar Marie-Joseph is very curious about the workings of our camera and microphone. I sit down patiently on a wooden bench while the women, with more than their usual enthusiasm, begin their TED Talk on electromagnetism and digitization. It is doubtful how much of this talk a 19th century Trappist can understand, but Friar Marie-Joseph does at least appreciate the depth of his ignorance.
Truly a divine wonder,
He says, as we replay some footage of him walking through the garden.
There I am!
He cries out, then slaps me on the shoulder.
Video ergo sum.
Except for the birds and the sound of the distant brook, it is very quiet as we walk. The garden is so beautiful and well ordered. To disturb this mini paradise seems criminal, so for a long time we all stay quiet. Maybe being a Trappist monk is not such a bad career choice. We continue our walk.
Does Robert still perform?
No, not for many years.
9 years.
So long. C'est dommage.
The gentleness of the friar's voice and gesture is hard to reconcile with the image of a man with a pistol on top of Mount Etna. Is it a pity, though?
Very much.
I'm thrown by this answer and have to reorder my thoughts. You would have seen Mr. Coates perform in London.
I never missed a debut. We were good friends. Does something trouble you, my son?
Oh, no. Well, maybe. It's just that we've heard from others who saw Mr. Coates that he was, well, I'll just blurt it out, that he wasn't very good, that he was a poor player, so to speak. The friar stops for a moment to check on some chard.
And you wish to compare him with Mr. Garrick and Mr. Kemble?
Well, no, not necessarily.
Robert was, and still is, I should think, a man of great passion. Of this there can be no doubt.
I nod. We all nod.
A man of passion and love. What more can you ask of an artist?
More modesty, I'm thinking, but we say nothing. We nod some more. We approach a small clearing and a tiny still pond. A heron stands in the middle. It does not seem threatened by us. Friar Marie-Joseph invites us to sit on a bench opposite him.
What of yourself, Mr. Pruitt? Have you seen Mr. Coates perform?
Not in London.
Did you know he filled the theatres at every performance? Very often hundreds were turned away.
All this is true.
And among those who came to see him were the crème de la crème of London society.
You included.
Je pense que non, mademoiselle. As a foreigner, I hardly counted. I am reminded of the night at Haymarket when Robert first performed in the role of Lothario. Everyone was there. The Duke of Brunswick, the Duke of Devonshire, the Portuguese ambassador, who, at the time, was a close friend, the Earl of Canule, Viscount Castlereagh, Sir Godfrey Webster. I cannot remember them all. On another occasion, the Prince Regent himself came. Robert was much flattered, and had a right to be.
His performances were very well attended. Immediately I want to crack myself on the forehead for saying something so stupid and obvious.
The place was abuzz, certainly. In fact, if memory serves me, a good portion of the audience hissed when I arrived in my box that evening. It seemed both Robert and I shared a common notoriety, but I speak only of an uneducated minority. Almost as soon as I was hissed, the greater majority responded with cheers and applause, and so it was for Robert when he first appeared on stage.
Is it true some of the malcontents shouted out rude, what would you call them, barbs, imitating roosters, shouting out cock-a-doodle-doo?
It is true, Mr. Pruitt. And wonderfully, Robert stood there like Jesus before Pilate, most noble in his silence. Until later, of course.
What did he say later?
Let me see if I can recall. Words to this effect. If it be the wish of the nobility and gentry that this play should proceed, I will return the money to those noisy persons to go away. At which point there was thunderous applause, and the play did indeed proceed.
So Mr. Coates's words saved the day.
Until the fourth act.
Whatever follow-up questions I had already now seemed pointless, but Friar Marie-Joseph, at the risk of being untrappist and frivolous, seemed happy to fill the silence.
Of course, as I'm sure you know, Robert was most celebrated for his interpretation of Romeo, which he was asked to perform time and time again. I cannot decide which he loved more, the balcony scene or the tomb scene. For myself, I loved them equally.
I tried to imagine the friar in full hussar uniform with scimitar and drooping mustache.
During one performance, Robert stopped in mid-scene, which he was prone to do from time to time.
Mr. Coates had no reservations about breaking the fourth wall?
No, mademoiselle. Robert did not believe in walls. So, there Robert stands. It is seared in my memory to this day. One hand still clasping the balcony, and with his other gesticulating to the audience. With a grin as bright as diamonds, he pulls from his pocket a pinch of snuff. Noticing my box sits within easy reach, he offers a second pinch to me, which I accept gratefully.
Extraordinary.
There is a general merriment through the theatre. One man below shouts out, I say, Romeo, give us a pinch.
So what does he do?
Passes his snuff box around, of course, and when all who care to have had their fill, he returns to the scene.
Or Juliet.
Friar, that's quite the story. Very amusing, but would you not also call it a little outrageous?
What I would call it, sir, is an act of passion, of love. I never did watch Robert perform on stage without experiencing a surge of joy in my heart. Nothing could deter the man from sharing his passion, and if the scene went well, he would often do it again.
We sit for some moments in silence. We watch the heron shoot its head suddenly into the water and catch a tiny fish. And outside the theatre, Friar, you saw Mr. Coates socially?
Indeed, we had competing carriages, though I confess Robert's curricle was more impressive than mine.
And you competed for the same woman as well.
Miss Tilney Long, you mean? Not what I would call a proper competition. Catherine was like a precious rose. It was one's duties to stop, bow down, and admire. Robert and I were always men of duty.
I nod, and begin maybe to have a dim appreciation for this chaste, chivalrous version of love, a notion people in my own century would find utterly laughable.
Mr. Pruitt, now it is my turn. I also have questions.
A cloud passes overhead, momentarily blocking the sun. Friar Marie-Joseph takes several moments to study us. He puts his hood back over his head.
You are not from here, are you?
Like I said, we were just in London.
From much further away, I think.
We're from America originally. Canada, to be precise.
Canada. There are many Jesuits in Canada. But I think your origins are even more exotic.
What should we say? What can we say? We look at each other.
Your image device. Video camera, did you call it?
Linda stops filming. I've never seen her do that before.
And your voice recorder. Microphone, is that correct?
Janet, too, puts down her boom and mic.
They are not of this world, I think.
We haven't scripted for anything like this. Ah, well, in a sense, I suppose.
You're exactly right, Friar. We're not of this world.
Ah, so I gleaned. You are of a different realm. Angels, possibly?
Angels? No, Friar.
Definitely not angels.
Friar Marie-Joseph's smile is relentless, joined now by eyes that seem to look straight through us.
There is no smell of sulfur about you, so neither are you demons.
Okay, now it's my turn for a little improv. Not my strong suit, but we are from another realm, so to speak. I look over at Janet, who picks up my cue.
Friar Joseph Marie, you will surely find this hard to believe, but we are, in fact...
Is she going to say it? I think she is.
We're from the future.
Oh, crazy but true.
Whose turn is it to speak? Is it mine? The silence is deadly.
We're from the year 2024.
I half expect a great laugh, or maybe some holy water to be thrown at us. But the friar does not react straight away. He looks down at the ground. He nods slowly. Then he finally lifts his head.
I put no limits on the Lord Almighty's powers. Heavenly creatures do not know time as mere mortals do.
But like my colleague said, we're definitely not angels.
I can see the wheels spinning inside the friar's head. He's a well-educated man, a scholar, really. All the same, it's a lot for anyone to take in.
If what you say is true, in your realm, I have been dead for almost 2 centuries. Your knowledge of things, material and beyond, must far surpass mine. If you wished, you could tell me of my death.
I look at Janet. She doesn't seem to know, or maybe she just doesn't want to punch a hole in the space-time continuum by giving our friar foreknowledge of his future.
You had foreknowledge of my existence, and my friendship with Robert. You must know something of my later years as well.
I don't know if I should really do this.
Janet pulls a notebook out of her bag and flips through some pages.
We don't know everything about your life, but thanks to your own writing, we know quite a bit.
I do like to take my pen to paper.
You wrote quite a bit. A good deal is lost, I'm afraid, but your pilgrimage to Palestine, Egypt, and the Holy Land, that sold quite well, actually.
I will go to the Holy Land.
Yes, let me see, in about 6 years from now.
A great blessing.
Should I tell you more?
Janet thumbs through her notes. Space-time continuum be damned.
Let me see. Oh, but before your holy pilgrimage, I'm afraid there's more trouble in Paris. You're going to have to flee the monastery again. It's quite a messy business, I'm sorry to say.
So, back to Switzerland.
I'm afraid so. But the good news is, only a year later, King Louis-Philippe will come to the throne, and he'll restore the Trappist monasteries, so you can go back to France.
A second great blessing.
And you will be made abbot about this time.
That cannot be true.
So history records, Friar Marie-Joseph, abbot of Notre-Dame du Mont des Olives.
For the first time in our interview, the friar looks at a loss, even stunned. I begin to wonder if Janet feels a sense of power unraveling the future like this. In any case, there's no stopping her now.
And then, about 12 years from now, you will be summoned to Rome by the Pope.
Pope Leo.
By this time, another Pope, Gregory XVI.
What have I done wrong?
Nothing. In fact, the Pope will honor you. But I think maybe it is best if we keep the details of all that a surprise.
I think you are right in retaining some mystery, mademoiselle.
And, of course, there are many bumps in the road along the way.
The friar nods. He is a man accustomed to bumps.
Did you know, mademoiselle, that I was in Rome as a young man?
I did not know that.
One night, on a dare, my friends and I climbed right to the base of the dome in St. Peter's, so we could carve our initials. We could easily have killed ourselves, especially on the way down.
Friar Marie-Joseph turns away from us and stares out over the pond, its gentle ripples perhaps a metaphor for his remaining years.
After Rome, do I come home?
You stay in Rome.
The friar turns back to us. For the first time, he seems his age.
Like St. Peter.
Our time with the friar was extremely interesting, but also very draining. And back on our second-hand Toronto sofa, we argue over the ethics of what just went down.
He probably didn't even believe us.
Oh, he believed us.
Well, even if he did, is there anything I said that would be likely to change his behavior? He's a Trappist, for God's sakes. He has vows. He has to behave.
You hope.
What possible harm could come from his knowing he was going to the Holy Land, other than brightening his life, giving him something to look forward to?
I say nothing. Linda says nothing. We return to our takeout. Mexican tonight. How's the camera holding up?
Date's still stuck on 1825, but other than that, fine.
You said the battery had run down to 12%, though.
Yeah, but I was watching it. No worries, Fred.
I don't think we should let it get below 20%.
Definitely not.
Fine. I do keep a spare in my bag.
Good.
You're welcome.
We finish our fajitas and review the day's footage. It's remarkable how some people just have presence, or put another way, how the camera loves them. Friar Marie-Joseph is such a man. One cannot help but hang on his every word. What must he have been like 15 years before in London, in full hussar uniform, sword and pistol at his side, golden spurs behind his boots, and those full dark locks flowing down to his shoulders? It did not stretch the imagination to believe 24,000 Croatians would follow him without question. Janet, did you say something earlier about the Baron getting kicked out of England? A little salsa has dripped down onto Janet's chin.
What?
Why did they kick him out?
Well, actually, that's quite funny in retrospect. Basically, the Baron was blackmailing the War Department,
What?
demanding that they pay the expenses of transporting the Croatians to England and then housing them.
Demanding.
Yes, but in the end, the War Department decides Baron Ferdinand's scheme isn't feasible, and they ask him to leave. They offer him £1,000 for his trouble.
And then he leaves.
Oh no, he refuses.
Oh, yeah, he does.
He itemizes his expenses and tells the government they owe him at least £50,000.
Holy crap.
And then he basically barricades himself inside his house, declaring he has 200 pounds of explosives inside, which he will not hesitate to use if he is not properly compensated.
And?
It turns out to be mostly bluff. Eventually, a large contingent of soldiers break down his front door and escort, don't you love that word, escort the friar to Dover. And that is the last England ever sees of him.
And all this he does within the space of 2 short years.
I told you he'd be an interesting interview. The man sure knew how to make a splash, or a boom if necessary.
And yet, somehow, he ends up being a mild-mannered monk in a French monastery.
Oh, and that reminds me, I just found this quote, can't remember the man's name. In his memoir, he talked about visiting Baron/Friar in the monastery. Here's how he described him. A barrel of gunpowder under a cowl. Perfect, don't you think?
Linda has just finished her second fajita and is wiping her fingers. Not a pretty sight.
This is all really, really fascinating, guys, but are we really going to be able to use any of this footage?
You won't want to miss Part 3, the finale of The Worst of All Time.